A silent stone wall cuts across a lonely landscape. What secrets lie buried in the dust of Rome's farthest borders? For centuries, the empire's frontier, the limes, was held by a chain of hundreds of forts. This was the edge of the known world, a place of constant watchfulness and whispered stories. Today, we are embarking on a journey to that edge, to uncover 25 of the most baffling enigmas the legions left behind. You will discover tales of entire garrisons that vanished without a trace, of cursed artifacts that speak of personal vengeance, and of watchtowers where the last light of Rome flickered out. We will see how a single, carefully erased stone can rewrite history, and why a commander would choose to live outside his own protective walls. This is an exploration of the shadows where history's records end and deep mystery begins. What does it feel like to stand at the final border of a fading empire? The first whispers from the edge come not from stone, but from wood and ink. At the fort of Vindolanda, just south of Hadrian's wall, the damp earth performed a miracle of preservation. It saved hundreds of thin, postcard-sized wooden tablets, personal letters, and military notes written in carbon ink, a frozen moment of Roman military life. We read a commander's wife inviting a friend to her birthday party, a soldier requesting more beer, and a crisp report on the native Britons, noting with cool observation that they are, quote, unprotected by armor. The voice is so immediate, so human, it collapses 2,000 years, but within this cacophony of daily life lies a profound silence. One set of tablets from a specific period paints a picture of a fully manned, active cohort. The correspondence is brisk, the bureaucracy humming. Then it stops, the stream of notes dries up completely. The archaeological layer above shows no signs of a catastrophic fire, no scattered weapons from a surprise attack, no mass graves hinting at plague. The fort was not destroyed, it was simply abandoned by its voice. Where did the 500 men of that cohort go? Did they receive sudden orders to march north on a campaign from which they never returned? Was the scribe who penned that famous line about the Britons among them, his stylus stilled forever? The tablets grant us a stunning intimacy, only to frame a deeper, more unsettling question. How does an entire community of soldiers, with its paperwork in perfect order, vanish from history without leaving a single clue in the dirt behind them? This sudden silence from a Roman fort is haunting, but it is not the only way the frontier speaks of strange departures. To the north, in the misty highlands of what is now Scotland, lies a different kind of ghost. The Antonine Wall was Rome's final, bold thrust into the wilderness, a turf and timber rampart built across the narrow waste of the country. It was a statement of pure ambition, constructed under Emperor Antoninus Pius to push the empire's border deeper than Hadrian's wall to the south. Yet this great project was occupied for barely 20 years before the legions pulled back for good. The mystery here is not the strategic retreat, which historians can explain, but the chillingly deliberate way they left. This was not a simple abandonment, it was a ritual dismantling. Archaeologists have found altars, once dedicated to Roman gods, carefully buried face down in the earth, a profound act of desecration meant to sever a sacred bond. The massive gateways through the wall were not just torn down, they were taken apart stone by stone, and the passages were then meticulously packed with clean, sterile clay, as if sealing a tomb. Most eerily of all, offerings of coins and animal bones have been discovered placed in the wall's foundation, trenches not during its construction, but as it was being systematically destroyed. It is as if the Romans were conducting a funeral for the frontier itself. While other retreats were orderly military withdrawals, this was something else entirely. Was it a religious ceremony to spiritually kill the wall, to prevent its power from falling into enemy hands? Or a massive act of purification, cleansing the land of their presence as they departed? The short, sharp life of the Antonine Wall ended not with a bang, but with a whisper of strange, sacred rites performed in the Scottish drizzle, leaving behind a ghost made of filled ditches and inverted guards. The ritual burial of a frontier is one kind of silence, but the disappearance of an entire legion is another. Among the most enduring legends of Rome is the fate of the Ninth Legion, the Legio Nona Hispana. Its name vanishes from the military rolls in the early 2nd century, leaving behind only a ghost story and a question mark, while popular tales often place its end in the misty forests of northern Britain. A key piece of the puzzle lies far to the east on the banks of the Rhine River. The fort at Noviomagus, modern Nijmegen in the Netherlands, was a crucial stronghold in the province of Germania Inferior. Here, archaeologists have found tiles stamped with the ninth's mark and an altar dedicated by a centurion of the legion. This evidence firmly places the ninth at this frontier outpost around the very time it fades from history. Then the record goes cold. At Noviomagus, there are no later inscriptions, no monuments celebrating a victory or a safe return. It is as if the legion marched out of the fort's gates and into a wall of fog. The theory is that the ninth, perhaps transferred to bolster the Rhine frontier, was caught in a catastrophic, unrecorded battle. A sudden barbarian uprising, a disastrous ambush at a river crossing, a battle so complete that no courier survived to report the loss. The Roman historians, focused on the emperor's activities, might never have deemed a single legion's destruction on a distant border worthy of note. Other scholars argue the legion was quietly disbanded after a disgrace, or even destroyed later in the Eastern Empire. But the haunting clue is the physical silence at Noviomagus. The stamped tiles and that one altar are not the beginning of a story there, they are the end. They are the last tangible proof that the Ninth Legion ever existed, a handful of stones that speak of a presence, then an absolute echoing absence. We can picture the long column of soldiers, 5,000 men, their standards held high, leaving the solid timber walls of the fort for a routine patrol or a forced march to another crisis. The dust of their passage settles on the road, and they simply never come back. The silence that swallowed legions is profound, but sometimes the frontier speaks in deliberate, whispered acts of reverence. Deep within the fort of Brockelicia at Karreburg, on the bleak stretch of Hadrian's wall, excavators uncovered a different kind of secret. Beneath the floor of a small, windowless building, they found a collection of stone altars and statues, all carefully laid to rest. This was a Mithraeum, a temple to the soldier god Mithras, and its heart had been ritually buried by the faithful. The central scene showed Mithras in the act of slaying the cosmic bull, the Tauroctony, flanked by carved figures of his torch-bearing companions, Cautes and Cautopates. Alongside them were altars dedicated to Sol, the sun god, Mithras's divine ally. Each piece was placed with care, not hurled into a pit. This was not destruction. It was a funeral for a god. Mithraism was the ultimate soldier's cult, a secretive, all-male fraternity that promised salvation and brotherhood through a series of harrowing initiations. Its temples were designed to feel like caves, dark and secluded, places where a legionary could escape the rigid hierarchy of the army for a deeper spiritual bond. So why, when this fort was finally abandoned, would the last members of the cult choose to bury their most sacred icons? One compelling theory is protection. To desecrate a god's image was a terrible offense. By burying the statues, the final initiates were performing a sacred duty, shielding the divine power within the stone from the hands of those who did not understand the mysteries, whether they were incoming barbarians or perhaps even later Christians ordered to purge pagan sites. They were hiding their god, hoping he might one day be awakened. Alternatively, this could have been the ultimate act of closure. In the Mithraic belief system, the slaying of the bull was an act of creation. By burying this scene, the soldiers were symbolically returning that creative force to the earth, ending the cycle as their own presence on the frontier ended. The empty shell of the temple above ground tells one story of abandonment, but the careful arrangement of stones in the dark earth below tells another, far more intimate one. It speaks of a small group of men in the face of the empire's retreat, taking solemn, secret pains to do right by their god. They left no written explanation. Only the arranged stones remain, a puzzle of faith laid to rest under the cold English soil. From the silent burial of gods, we turn to a voice that was never meant to be heard. In the shadows of the fort at Saguntium, in what is now Caernarfon in Wales, archaeologists unearthed a small, crumpled sheet of lead. Unrolled and cleaned, it revealed not an inventory or a letter home, but a cry of pure, focused rage. This is a defixio, a curse tablet, and its target was a thief. The anonymous soldier who inscribed it called upon the gods to torment the person who stole his burris, his hooded cloak. The curse is chillingly specific, asking for the thief to be denied sleep and health until the garment is returned. Here, at the very edge of the empire, we are not dealing with grand strategy or legionary movements, but with a personal and profound violation. A burris was not just a piece of uniform, it was a vital defense against the relentless cold and damp of the British frontier. To steal it was to steal comfort, security, and a piece of a soldier's identity. So who was the culprit? Was it a fellow legionary driven by envy or desperation within the cramped barracks? Or was it a local from the settlement outside the walls seeing an opportunity? The tablet does not say, leaving us with a snapshot of suspicion that would have poisoned the atmosphere of the entire fort. The real power of this curse lay in its creation. The act of carefully scratching the words into the soft lead, folding or piercing the tablet, and then hiding it in a sacred spring or burying it in a grave was a form of psychological warfare. It transformed private fury into a divine contract. The soldier, feeling wronged by a system that might not care about a missing cloak, bypassed his centurion entirely and took his case directly to the gods. This was his way of reclaiming agency in a world of strict discipline and random hardship. The ultimate mystery, of course, is whether it worked. Did the thief suffer nightmares as requested? Did a sudden illness prompt a guilty conscience? We will never know if the cloak was secretly returned, or if the soldier spent the rest of his watch glancing bitterly at every similar garment in the fort. The lead scroll from Saguntium gives us no ending. It simply hangs in the air, a 2,000-year-old spell cast from a place of deep personal grievance, reminding us that the greatest tensions on the frontier often lived in the small, cold spaces between men. Personal grievances could fester within a fort's walls, but beyond them lay a frontier of absolute desolation. Far to the south, where the empire's reach stretched toward the Sahara, Rome built outposts in a dialogue not with enemy armies, but with the desert itself. Two forts in particular, Gallia and a southern garrison of Thamugadi, stand as monuments to this lonely struggle, their ends not written in battle reports but erased by the wind and sand. Gallia, known today as Bu Engem in Libya, was a speck of order in a vast ocean of dunes. Its surviving records, similar to those at Vindolanda but from a far harsher climate, detail the mundane rhythm of desert duty, patrols sent into the blistering heat, requests for new camel shoes, and careful notes on the well's water level. The soldiers stationed here were likely monitoring nomadic tribes and protecting the caravan routes that brought wealth from deep Africa. Then the administrative chatter stops. There is no evidence of a siege, no layer of ash from a fire. The fort was simply repossessed. The prevailing theory is that the lifeblood of any desert outpost, its water, finally failed. An aquifer could have shifted or a distant spring dried up. Without it, the fort became a death trap. The garrison would have been ordered to withdraw, a slow, thirsty march to the coast, leaving the empty stone shells to the mercy of the elements. But an even deeper mystery lies with the southern garrison of Thamugadi, a city in modern Algeria. This was not a standalone fort, but a distant watchpost, a set of eyes on the southern trade roads. Its fate is more visually haunting. Here, archaeologists find not the neat abandonment of a strategic withdrawal, but a scene of gradual, irresistible consumption. Doorways are half filled with drifted sand. Courtyards appear as shallow bowls in a sea of grit. It paints a picture not of a sudden evacuation, but of a losing battle fought day by day, season by season. Was it a decades-long process of desertification where the climate slowly grew drier and the dunes began to march inch by terrifying inch toward the walls? Or did one monstrous, legendary sandstorm, a Khamsin, descend upon the post, burying it in a single, suffocating event from which it was never dug out? The true eeriness of these places lies in their silence. We can imagine the last soldier to leave Goliath, taking a final look back at the empty barracks, the dust already gathering in the commander's quarters. At Thamugadi's southern watch, we can almost feel the growing dread as the daily task of shoveling sand from the gatehouse became more futile, until one day the order came to seal the records and retreat north, the crest of a dune finally breaking over the parapet like a silent, golden wave. These forts were not conquered, they were patiently, utterly reclaimed. The desert did not attack, it merely waited, and in its immense, timeless patience lies a different kind of frontier terror. The fear of being forgotten, not by history, but by the very earth. The desert's silence is absolute, but on another frontier, the final moments were anything but quiet. High on the wind-scoured cliffs of Huntcliffe in northern Britain, a lonely signal tower stood sentinel. This was no sprawling fort, but a vital link in a chain, part of the late Roman coastal defense system known as the Saxon Shore. Its job was simple and critical: keep watch over the grey expanse of the North Sea, and if enemy sails appeared, light a beacon to warn the garrison fort miles behind it. This tower was the Empire's eye, meant to see danger coming from impossibly far away. What it saw in its last hour, however, has been swallowed by history, leaving only a scene of horror in the ground. When archaeologists excavated the site, they found the tower's stonework scorched by intense fire, and in the deep, dark shaft of the well, they discovered the bones of several individuals, men, women, and children, thrown down into the void. This was not a burial, it was a brutal, final act. The evidence screams of a surprise attack so swift and overwhelming that the defenders, and likely the families who lived with them, had no chance to flee or send a signal. They were killed and their bodies were dumped into their own water source, a deliberate act of desecration meant to poison the site for anyone who might follow. Here lies the core of the mystery. Historical records from this late period, the 4th or early 5th century, are fragmentary, but they speak of Saxon raids on the southern and eastern coasts of Britain. Huntcliffe is far to the north. Who could have struck here with such violence and left no written trace? Were they Saxon adventurers on a longer, more daring voyage than any chronicler noted? Could they have been Pictish pirates from the north striking south by sea? Or perhaps most chilling of all, were they not foreigners at all, but local rebel forces or mercenaries who turned on their Roman employers? The tower's purpose makes its fall especially terrifying. This was an early warning system. Its entire reason for existing was to prevent surprise. So what did that last sentry see appearing on the horizon? A fleet he recognized as friendly until it was too late. A single, deceptive trader's vessel that disgorged a warband at the cliff's base under cover of darkness. The fire was lit, but clearly the signal either never reached its destination or was tragically ignored. We can stand on that cliff today and feel the exposure, the sheer isolation. The wind whips, the sea churns below, and the distance to the next point of safety feels vast. In that setting, the silent well is a profound monument. It holds not just bones, but the unanswered question of the attack that history forgot. The Empire's eye was put out, and with its dying sight, it witnessed a catastrophe whose name we will never know. A silent well holds one kind of horror, but a chest of treasure can whisper a different, more confusing tale. On the windswept ridge where Hadrian's wall clings to the land, the fort of Hadrian stands as a textbook example of Roman abandonment. Its history, carved in stone and soil, tells a clear story. The garrison was officially withdrawn in the late 4th century as the empire crumbled. The barracks emptied, the gates were sealed, and the frontier fell dark. Yet, tucked beneath the floor of a long, cold commander's house, archaeologists found a small, rusted pot. Inside was a hoard of coins. This alone is not unusual. People often buried their savings in times of trouble, hoping to retrieve them later. The true mystery is stamped on the coins' faces. They were not from the fort's heyday. The latest coins in that clay pot were minted decades, perhaps even half a century, after Hadrian was supposed to be a deserted ruin. This is a chronological impossibility, a glitch in the historical record. It is as if you found a smartphone buried in the foundations of a medieval castle. The official timeline says no one was there, but the coins scream that someone was. So who held this money, and what were they doing in an abandoned fort? One compelling theory is of a secret shadow occupation. After the legions marched south for the last time, did a small community cling on? Perhaps retired soldiers and their families or local farmers moved into the stone shells for protection, using the old walls to shield them from the chaos of the fading empire. They would have lived a quiet, unofficial life, trading with whoever passed by, their existence never important enough to be recorded by the distant, dying administration in Rome. The coin hoard might represent the life savings of such a community's leader, hidden during a moment of fresh danger, a raid by Picts from the north or rival bands from the south. He buried his wealth, intending to return when the threat passed, but for some reason he never could. Another, more solitary possibility is that of a traveling merchant. The great Roman road still ran past the fort's silent gates. A merchant carrying his profits across the now lawless frontier might have seen the crumbling walls as a perfect, secluded hiding spot. He could have slipped inside, buried his strongbox under the flagstones of the old commander's home, a place he thought he could remember, and continued on his journey. But the frontier in those days was a dangerous place, and he may have met a fate that prevented his return. The coins waited, a secret slowly being claimed by the earth. This small hoard does more than hint at lost treasure. It challenges the very narrative of a clean end. History loves clear dates, but reality is often messy. The coins from Hadrian suggest the frontier did not die with a single, decisive snap, but faded like an echo, with life hard, tenacious, and utterly unrecorded lingering in its bones long after the empire had turned out the lights. Within the rigid stone barracks of a centurion's quarters, archaeologists uncovered a small, personal rebellion. Built into the wall was a lararium, a niche for a household shrine. Every Roman home had one, a sacred space for the lares, the protective spirits of the household and the family ancestors. A soldier, especially an officer, would be expected to maintain this practice, a touchstone of Roman identity and order far from home. But the figurines found within this particular shrine were not standard issue. Alongside the expected Roman statuettes, there stood the carved image of a local Celtic deity, perhaps a god of the spring or a spirit of the forest. This was not just a souvenir, it was an act of spiritual integration placed at the very heart of a centurion's private world. The military machine ran on discipline and a shared pantheon of gods: Jupiter for victory, Mars for war, the emperor's genius for loyalty. To openly embrace a native god could be seen as a weakening of Roman virtue, a dangerous fraternization with the very culture the army was meant to dominate. So why would a commander, a man whose job depended on upholding Roman order, risk it? One possibility is pure pragmatism. This centurion believed in covering all his bases. The lares protected his household, but they were spirits of Italy, of Rome. Here, in the misty, alien landscape of Britannia, different powers ruled. The local tribes clearly believed in their gods, and their land seemed to answer to them. By including this figure, the centurion might have been seeking an alliance, paying his respects to the landlord, so to speak, to ensure the safety of his men and the success of his patrols in those deep, dark woods. It was a spiritual bribe, a form of divine diplomacy. Another, more personal interpretation is that this represents a genuine change of heart. After years stationed on the frontier, a man might find the rigid Roman cosmology insufficient. The local god spoke directly to the landscape he saw every day, to that particular river that flooded each spring, to the strange grove of oaks that filled his men with superstition. This syncretic faith, this blending of beliefs, could have been his private comfort, a way to make sense of his place in a land that would never truly feel like home. He kept it in his private quarters, a secret between him and the powers he felt watching. The shrine niche, now empty in a museum, once held this quiet tension. By day, the centurion would have drilled his men in Latin commands, inspected their Roman armor, and offered the standard sacrifices for the emperor's health. By night, in the flickering lamplight of his quarters, he might have also left a small offering of grain or wine before the figure of a British god. It reveals a man caught between two worlds, performing the duty demanded by an empire thousands of miles away, while quietly seeking the favor of the spirits right outside his door. A centurion's private faith shows adaptation, but the army's very blueprint for order could also fracture under pressure. At the supply fort of Arbea in South Shields, the stones themselves tell a story of profound confusion. This was a crucial logistical hub, built to receive grain shipments by sea and feed the hungry mouths along Hadrian's wall. A Roman military fort followed a rigid, cookie-cutter design, a pattern repeated from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Germany. The headquarters building, the Principia, always sat at the central crossroads. The granaries, vital for survival, were among the first structures raised, their deep, ventilated foundations laid even before the barracks. It was a non-negotiable logic: secure your food, then build everything else around it. But at Arbea, the archaeological layers reveal a sequence that defies all military logic. The granaries appear to have been constructed last. The headquarters was placed off-center in an awkward, almost haphazard location. It is as if the builders opened the standard Roman fort manual and then deliberately built every chapter out of order. This is not a case of later renovation or expansion. The very foundations were laid in this bizarre sequence, meaning the plan was flawed from the very first day. So what happened here? One compelling theory is sheer, desperate urgency. Imagine the scenario. The wall's garrison is on the brink of starvation. Ships laden with grain are arriving at the estuary, but there is no protected storage. The commanding officer, under direct orders from a frantic governor, abandons the rule book. He barks commands to forget the headquarters, ignore the barracks, and just get the granaries built now. His men work day and night, throwing up the massive stone warehouses directly on the landing beach. Only once the grain is safely under lock and key does he allow construction on the rest of the fort to proceed, fitting the other buildings in wherever space allows, resulting in the off-kilter headquarters. This is a fort born in a state of emergency. Another possibility points to a profound communication breakdown. Perhaps the original engineer, a Roman military architect, was killed or reassigned mid-project. The work might then have fallen to local laborers or a junior engineer who simply did not understand the sacred principles of Roman castrametation, the science of camp building. They might have followed instructions literally from a flawed sketch, or applied local British construction traditions to an imperial Roman design, creating this strange hybrid. The result is a fort that functions, but in a way that would make any seasoned legionary commander deeply uneasy. Every stone at Arbea whispers of a moment where perfect imperial order met messy, frantic reality. It stands not as a monument to Roman efficiency, but to Roman improvisation, a testament to what happened when the blueprint failed and men on the ground had to make it work, even if it meant building their world backwards. A fort's very architecture can be a lie told in stone. At Chester's, one of the great cavalry forts along Hadrian's Wall, the design speaks of thundering hooves and swift mobility. The gates are unusually wide, built to accommodate riders exiting two abreast. The barracks feature long, narrow rooms perfect for stabling horses, with drainage channels in the floors, and the headquarters even has a special courtyard for exercising the animals. This was built for an ala, a 500-strong elite cavalry wing, the eyes and the rapid reaction force of the frontier. Yet, when archaeologists sift through the layers of occupation, the story changes. The physical evidence tells a quieter, stranger tale. There is a curious lack of horse bones, which are typically plentiful at true cavalry bases. The finds of specialized cavalry gear, distinctive lance heads, elaborate harness fittings, and certain types of stirrups are surprisingly sparse. Most tellingly, the barracks, those long rooms meant for horses, show signs of being partitioned into smaller spaces, the kind suited for groups of infantrymen to bunk down. For long stretches of its history, it seems the fort built for cavalry was actually held by foot soldiers. This mismatch creates a fascinating logistical puzzle. Why station infantry in a fort specifically engineered for cavalry? One straightforward answer is grim necessity. The prestigious ala assigned to Chester's may have been deployed elsewhere, sent off on a distant campaign in another troubled province, and never returned, leaving the fort empty. The army, desperate to hold the wall, would have filled the vacancy with whatever troops were available. A cohort of infantry marched in and made do. They would have lived in the awkward stables, their centurions puzzling over the wasteful, oversized gateways. The horses and the mobility they represented were simply gone, perhaps lost to battle, disease, or a supply failure. But another theory is far more cunning. What if this was a deliberate deception? A frontier is a theater of perception as much as force. Pictish scouts watching from the distant hills would see the imposing fort with its broad gates and assume it housed the empire's swiftest horsemen. That belief alone could deter raids, as no chieftain would want to be caught in the open by a charging cavalry squadron. By maintaining the facade, keeping the stables standing, perhaps even having a few riders make showy patrols, the Romans could project a strength they did not fully possess. Chester's could have been a Potemkin village on the wall, a magnificent bluff. The reality for the infantry stationed there, however, was likely one of constant inconvenience. Imagine foot soldiers tasked with guarding a fortress whose very layout was a daily reminder of a capability they lacked. They manned walls designed to protect precious horses that weren't there, and looked out from towers meant to spot targets for cavalry that would never charge. The wide gates, so impressive to an outsider, would have been a nightmare to defend with a reduced infantry force, requiring more men to secure each entrance. The fort's grand design became a cumbersome shell. So was Chester's a testament to loss or to psychological warfare. The stones boast of cavalry, but the small finds whisper of infantry. This gap between architectural intention and human reality reveals a frontier that could be as much about illusion as it was about iron and stone, where sometimes holding the line meant living inside a carefully maintained myth. The silent lies of a fort's design are one thing, but the deliberate destruction of its own history is another. At the frontier fort of Vindolanda, among the famous wooden letters, archaeologists unearthed a different kind of document, one written in stone. It was a heavy, rectangular slab, a building inscription meant to commemorate the construction or repair of a barrack block or a temple. Such stones were the public record of the frontier, declaring who built this, when, and in whose honor. But this one had been violently edited. The central line of text, the most important part, had been meticulously, painstakingly chiseled away. The stonecutter did not smash the slab or deface it randomly. He worked with a grim focus, gouging out just the names, leaving the surrounding praise to the emperor and the gods perfectly intact. It was a surgical deletion from history. So what powerful words once sat in that smooth, blank scar? The most chilling possibility is that it bore the name of an emperor who later suffered damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was the ultimate posthumous punishment in Rome. Upon a ruler's disgrace for tyranny, weakness, or defeat, the Senate could order his name chiseled off every public monument, his statues torn down, and his reign erased from the official records. It was an attempt to kill a man's soul and his legacy. On the volatile frontier, such an order would have arrived as an urgent command. A centurion would have summoned the local mason and pointed to the inscription on the headquarters wall. That name right there must disappear. The mason would have set to work, the sharp taps of his chisel ringing through the fort as he literally hammered the former emperor out of existence in that place. But the mystery deepens because damnatio memoriae was typically a Senate-driven, empire-wide event. What if the erased name was not an emperor at all? What if it was the fort's own commanding officer? Imagine a legate who led his men into a catastrophic ambush, who betrayed the garrison to local tribes, or who was caught embezzling from the army's pay. His disgrace would have been local but no less potent. The soldiers who survived his incompetence or treachery might have taken matters into their own hands. Once he was dragged away in chains, they could have vented their fury and shame upon the stone that celebrated his command, obliterating his memory from the place he failed. There is a third, equally plausible culprit, a god. The early Roman frontier was a spiritual melting pot, but as Christianity gained power in the later empire, official tolerance faded. An altar dedicated to Mithras or Jupiter Dolicinus or a local Celtic deity could have become a dangerous liability. A newly Christian commander or one under orders from a pious governor might have chosen not to destroy the entire stone, which was costly and still served a structural purpose, but to sanitize it. By removing the pagan god's name, he neutered the dedication, leaving a generic monument to Roman engineering. Each of these erasures tells a story of fear. Fear of a disgraced emperor's lingering spirit, fear of a traitor's tainted memory, fear of divine wrath from an old god or a new one. The blank space is not empty. It is full of intention. Today, with advanced laser scanning, we can sometimes see the ghosts of those letters. The chisel did not remove the deep impression of the original carving, it merely smoothed over the top. Scans reveal slight variations in the stone's density, the faint shadow of strokes made 2,000 years ago. We can almost read the name again, but technology cannot tell us the human emotion behind the act. Was it done in the cold light of bureaucratic duty, in the hot rage of betrayed soldiers, or in the quiet anxiety of a man caught between the old world and the new? The stone from Vindolanda does not answer. It only presents the scar and the heavy silence that followed the last tap of the mason's hammer. A chiseled stone speaks of official erasure, but a small wooden sword tells a different story entirely. In the hardened world of the legionary barracks, a space designed for discipline and uniformity, archaeologists have made discoveries that soften the edges of history. Among the standard issue hobnails from boots and broken pieces of pottery, they have found objects that do not belong. A crudely carved wooden sword, small enough for a child's hand, or a simple clay doll with pinched features. These are not military gear, they are toys. Their presence in the heart of a soldier's only zone is a quiet, profound mystery that challenges our image of the frontier fort. The Roman army had strict regulations. In theory, during the early imperial period, legionaries were not permitted to marry. The barracks were for men, their equipment, and their duty. The discovery of children's playthings in such a space, then, is a puzzle. Who did these tiny artifacts belong to? One immediate answer points to privilege. The commanding officer of a fort, a legate or a senior tribune, was often an aristocrat who might bring his family with him on a multi-year posting. His son, living in the comparative luxury of the commander's house, could have easily wandered into the barracks area, leaving his toy behind after some game of soldiers. This is the simplest explanation, one of class exception, but the toys found are often not fine, imported playthings. They are locally made, rough and humble. This points to another, more shadowy possibility: the child of a slave. Many officers and even common soldiers owned personal slaves who performed tasks from cleaning armor to cooking meals. These slaves could have had families, and their children would have lived within the fort's walls, invisible to the official rosters. A slave child might have fashioned a toy from scrap wood, playing in a corner of the barracks while his father worked. The most compelling and debated theory, however, is that the rules were simply broken widely and quietly. As the empire settled into its frontiers, long-term postings became the norm. A legionary serving a 25-year term in a place like Britannia might form a de facto family with a local woman. While his marriage had no legal standing, his partner and their children could have been tolerated, living with him in the barracks in a space curtained off from the others, a domestic secret shared by the entire contubernium, his 8-man tent group. The crude wooden sword becomes a symbol of this hidden community. Imagine the scene. After drills, the soldier returns to his cramped quarters. His small son runs up, brandishing the toy weapon, and the hardened legionary smiles, perhaps even showing him how to hold it properly. It is a moment of profound humanity flickering within the rigid machine. These artifacts force us to reimagine the soundscape of a fort. Beyond the clang of armor and the march of boots, there might have been the distant, muffled laughter of children playing between the long barrack blocks. The smell of baking bread from the ovens might have mixed with the scent of a simple stew cooking over a small, illicit hearth in a soldier's room. The frontier was not just a wall of stone and men. It was a place where life, in all its stubborn, messy persistence, found a way. That small clay doll, lost under a bunk 2,000 years ago, is more than a toy. It is a silent witness to love and family in the most unlikely of places, a reminder that even on the edge of the empire, people built homes. The laughter of children once echoed where a deeper, more chilling secret was kept. At the heart of many frontier forts, the well was not just a source of water, it was the very pulse of the community. To poison it was to attack the fort's soul. At the legionary fortress of Isca, modern Caerleon in Wales, archaeologists undertook the painstaking task of excavating one such well, digging down through layers of time and debris. What they found was not a simple story of neglect. The layers told a deliberate, grim tale. Near the bottom, they found the expected silt and lost items from daily use: a coin, a broken cup. But higher up, as they reached the layer corresponding to the fort's final days, the character of the field changed dramatically. They uncovered the skeletons of dogs and other small animals, mixed with large quantities of butchered refuse and general waste. This was not an accidental clogging. This was a calculated act of contamination. Someone had systematically fouled the water source at the precise moment the fort ceased to function. The question hangs in the air like a bad smell. Who would do such a thing, and for what purpose? One strategic answer points to the retreating Romans themselves. In a disciplined withdrawal under pressure, a commander might order the wells poisoned as a scorched earth tactic. Deny the pursuing enemy the single most critical resource, water, and you slow their advance, you weaken them, you buy precious time for your own column to escape. It is a brutal but logical act of war, turning the fort's greatest asset into a weapon against its next occupants. The well's life-giving role is inverted, becoming an instrument of death. Yet the evidence could just as easily point the finger at the attackers. After overrunning the fort, a victorious war band might desecrate the well as the ultimate symbol of their conquest. Throwing the carcasses of slain animals, perhaps even the Romans' own guard dogs, into the water was a powerful statement. It said, your order is gone, your cleanliness is gone, your civilization ends here in this filth. It rendered the fortress uninhabitable, not for strategic reasons, but as a visceral act of domination and contempt. But there is a third, more enigmatic possibility. Could this have been a ritual act? In many ancient cultures, springs and wells were sacred, home to nymphs or water spirits. The deliberate, formal deposition of animal remains could have been an offering, not an act of spite. Perhaps the last Romans or the first new inhabitants performed a rite to appease the spirit of the place, to close a chapter or to transfer guardianship. They were killing the Wells-old Roman identity to rebirth it for a new era. The forensic work continues, trying to distinguish between these stories. Were the animals thrown in haphazardly or placed with care? Does the type of refuse match everyday kitchen waste or something more selective? Each detail is a clue. Standing before that excavated well shaft today, you can almost feel the weight of the decision. Someone stood at that stone lip, looked down into the dark water, and decided to end its purpose. Whether it was the cold calculus of a retreating centurion, the hot rage of a conquering warrior, or the solemn duty of a priest, the act itself speaks of a profound finality. To poison the well was to declare that this story was over, that no one, friend or foe, would ever drink from this particular source of Roman order again. It was the closing of a vein. The well's final act was one of absolute severance, but other stones tell stories of surprising integration. Carved into a tombstone found along the Danube frontier is the image of a man named Aelius Rufus, a centurion. He stands proudly in his Roman military tunic, his cloak fastened with a classic brooch. Yet in his hand he holds not the standard legionary sword, but a distinctively shaped native weapon, a curved blade or a long spear from his homeland. And his name, Aelius Rufus, while Roman in form, was almost certainly adopted. His birth name, the one his mother called him, was likely something like Botto or Decebalus or Chariuvalda, a name from the Thracian or Germanic tribes beyond the river. This is no ordinary soldier's memorial. It is a monument to a profound contradiction. How did a man born a barbarian from the very peoples the legions were built to fight come to command a century of Roman citizens? The stone offers no easy answers, only the solid fact of his rank and his dual identity. One path to that rank began in childhood, not on a battlefield but in a political arrangement. Sons of allied chieftains were sometimes taken as hostages to Rome, not as prisoners but as wards of the state. They were raised in Roman households, educated in Latin, and steeped in military culture. For the empire, this created loyal allies with inside knowledge of their own people. For the young man, it offered a dazzling career path unavailable in his father's hill fort. Aelius Rufus could have been such a person, his native ferocity and deep local knowledge refined into Roman discipline, making him uniquely valuable on the frontier he once called home. Another, more violent door opened through defeat. After a major campaign, surviving warriors from a conquered tribe might be given a stark choice: slavery or service. The strongest and youngest were often pressed into the auxiliaries, Rome's non-citizen fighting forces. Through 25 years of brutal service, a soldier could earn not just his pay, but his citizenship and a new Roman name, the alias on this tombstone. To then rise further from veteran auxiliary to centurion in a legion required exceptional merit, bravery in countless skirmishes, and the unwavering respect of the men he led. This stone shatters the simple story of Romans versus barbarians. The frontier was not a solid wall, but a membrane. Cultures, loyalties, and identities seeped through. Aelius Rufus, in his hybrid gear, represents this fluid reality. To his legionaries, he was Centurion Rufus, the man who gave the orders. To the traders in the fort's vicus, he was perhaps a bilingual negotiator. And in his private moments, maybe he still whispered prayers to the gods of his ancestors in a language Latin could not capture. His tombstone is a public declaration of success in the Roman world, but that native weapon in his stone hand is a quiet, permanent nod to the world he came from. He mastered both, and in doing so, he became something entirely new, a man of the frontier, belonging wholly to neither side, yet essential to the fragile peace between them. Sometimes the frontier did not just fade, it physically picked itself up and walked away. before the solid stone of Hadrian's wall locked the border in place, an earlier, more fluid frontier existed along the Steingate, an old military road stretching east to west. Here, forts were placed like temporary chess pieces, and one in particular, whose name is lost to us, performed a strange maneuver. Archaeologists can see its entire life cycle stamped into the earth. First, a fort was built with all the usual features: a timber palisade, barracks, a headquarters. It was occupied for a generation, the ground packed hard by thousands of military boots. Then, with no sign of attack or fire, it was systematically taken apart. The posts were pulled up, the buildings dismantled, and a few miles away, a new fort, nearly identical in size and layout, was constructed from the ground up. This was not an expansion or a relocation after a disaster. It was a deliberate, costly replication. The army moved its entire operation, lock, stock, and barrel, for a distance that offered no clear tactical advantage. The mystery is not in the move itself, but in the silence surrounding the reason. Why would Rome, an empire famed for its logistical efficiency, undertake such a wasteful, labor-intensive task? The most practical explanation points to the land itself. Perhaps the original site was discovered to be unhealthy, a hidden swamp causing rampant fever, or a water source that turned brackish and sickened the men and horses. Moving a few miles to higher, drier ground would have been a medical necessity, a decision made by a pragmatic commander to preserve his fighting strength. Another possibility is that the landscape literally shifted. A river crucial for transport and drinking water might have changed its course over a generation, leaving the fort stranded and its supply chain broken. Relocating to follow the riverbank would restore the fort's lifeline. But what if the reason was not practical but political? The Steingate was a provisional border, a line of control negotiated with local tribes. The shift of a fort a few miles north or south could represent a subtle redrawing of that line, a concession to a powerful chieftain, or a quiet annexation of territory. The fort's movement was the physical signature of a diplomatic deal, its new location a stone and timber treaty. Then there is the most haunting possibility of all, that the soldiers themselves demanded the move. The Roman world was deeply superstitious. A series of bad omens, lightning striking the headquarters, a plague among the livestock, or recurring nightmares reported by the men could have convinced the garrison that the site was cursed, that the local spirits were hostile. No amount of strategic logic can overcome a legion's conviction that they are living on damned ground. A centurion facing plummeting morale might have petitioned his commander for a relocation, arguing that a fresh start on untainted land was worth the backbreaking work. To visualize this, picture a simple map animation. You see a dot appear representing the first fort. It pulses with activity for years, then the dot vanishes. A moment later, a new, identical dot appears several miles away, connected by a dashed line showing the path of the move. That short, animated jump encapsulates a massive human effort and a profound question mark. Tracking these movements across the frontier is like reading a hidden language. Each relocation, each abandoned foundation, is a response to a pressure we can no longer see, a fever we cannot diagnose, a treaty whose terms are lost, or a ghost story that terrified 500 battle-hardened men. The fort that moved tells us that the border was not just a line to be held, but a living, breathing negotiation with the land, its people, and the unseen world. While forts could be moved and wells poisoned, the ultimate test of a frontier was the siege, a slow, grinding struggle where desperation bred invention. At the city of Dura Europos, a Roman outpost on the Euphrates River, the final confrontation in the mid-3rd century left behind a snapshot of such terror, preserved in dry sand for centuries. The Sasanian Persian army, seeking to crush this Roman thorn in their side, employed a classic tactic. They began digging a massive mine tunnel under the city's walls, intending to collapse the foundations and create a breach. The Roman defenders, detecting the vibrations, did not wait passively. they started their own tunnel, a countermine, aiming to intercept and destroy the Persian effort deep underground. The two tunnels met in a sudden, violent clash in the airless dark. Archaeologists who excavated this space found the mingled skeletons of at least 19 Roman and Persian soldiers locked in a final struggle. One Roman soldier was found curled protectively around his shield, another crushed beneath a collapsed timber support. The scene is a frozen moment of pure claustrophobic horror, a battle fought not under the sky but in a tomb of their own digging. Yet the greater mystery lies not in the main collision but in the smaller, bizarre offshoots. Branching from this central death chamber are several narrow, cramped passages. These tunnels are too small for effective combat or for moving men quickly. They go nowhere, ending abruptly in blank walls of clay. Their purpose defies easy military logic. One theory is that they were listening posts. In the silent, pressurized earth, a soldier with his ear to the tunnel face might hear the faint scrape of enemy picks through the soil, giving precious warning of the Persian dig's direction. These would be the ears of the besieged, desperate for any clue in the dark. Another, more aggressive idea is that they were attempts at flanking maneuvers. Perhaps Roman diggers, hearing Persians on the other side of a clay wall, tried to burrow around to attack them from the side or rear in a surprise pincer movement underground. The tunnels may have been abandoned when the main confrontation erupted, leaving these skeletal offshoots as ghostly plans never completed. The most haunting possibility, however, is that they are tunnels of pure panic. Imagine the scene after the tunnels met and fighting began. The air, already thin, would have been thick with dust and the smell of sweat and blood. Torches would have guttered, casting frantic shadows. A soldier, separated from his comrades or seeing a friend fall, might have tried to dig his own escape route in a blind, instinctive frenzy, clawing at the earth with his hands or a short tool until exhaustion or collapsing earth stopped him. These narrow, pointless burrows could be the physical imprint of a mind breaking under the ultimate stress, the archaeology of raw, unthinking fear. A diagram of the tunnel network looks less like a military blueprint and more like the frantic roots of a plant or the desperate scratching of a trapped animal. Each dead-end branch is a question. Was this a calculated tactic or the last act of a doomed man? The clay walls hold no answer. They simply record the shapes of darkness where strategy and terror became indistinguishable, and where the frontier's final defense played out not on walls but in the suffocating, silent earth beneath them. South of Hadrian's wall runs a quieter, more enigmatic earthwork, the vallum. This was not a defensive structure, but a vast flat-bottomed ditch flanked by two continuous mounds, creating a cleared, corridor-like zone behind the wall itself. Its official purpose remains debated, a boundary marker or a controlled access way, but in its shadowed southern ditch, a different story was being told. Over decades of excavation, archaeologists have uncovered not random trash, but deliberate, eerie deposits. They found the skulls of cattle carefully placed, not scattered. Alongside them were other offerings like pottery, sherds, and sometimes coins. This was no midden heap. The arrangement and repetition point to a sacred act, a ritual performed over and over by different hands across generations. Here, in the stark military geometry of the vallum, the army's practical earthwork became an altar. The mystery is one of location and intent. Why choose this specific utilitarian ditch for such offerings? The vallum was a rear area feature, a space of control, not a temple precinct. One compelling idea is that this was a unit tradition, a kind of regimental superstition passed down from veteran to recruit. Perhaps after a successful patrol or before a dangerous mission north of the wall, a group of soldiers would slaughter an ox from their supply train. They would then take the skull, the seat of the animal's life force, and place it in the ditch as an offering for continued luck and safe return. The vallum, as a defining line of their military world, became the logical place to seal this pact. It was a soldier's ritual separate from the formal ceremonies at the fort's headquarters. Another, more profound possibility connects to the spirit of the land itself. The Romans deeply believed in the genius loci, the protective spirit of a place. The frontier was not just a line on a map, it was a powerful, living entity, a threshold between the ordered Roman world and the chaotic unknown. The massive effort of building the wall and the vallum would have been seen as a monumental disturbance. What if these deposits were ongoing apologies and payments to that frontier spirit? By placing the skulls of valuable cattle, the ultimate wealth of an agricultural society, into the ditch, the soldiers were acknowledging the power of the place and seeking to placate it. They were building a relationship with the genius of the border, asking for its forbearance as they occupied its space. This practice reveals a fascinating duality in frontier life. Officially, the army celebrated the state gods and the emperor's cult in stone temples and parade ground ceremonies. But parallel to that, in the quiet of the ditch, a persistent folk religion thrived. It was earthy, immediate, and directly tied to the soldiers' daily reality of fear, hope, and survival. The arranged cattle skulls are a physical testament to a deep, almost primal need for protection that the official pantheon could not fully satisfy. They speak of men trying to negotiate with the very ground beneath their boots, seeking favor from the invisible forces that watched over the lonely, windswept line they were ordered to hold. The vallum's ditch, therefore, holds two histories, one of imperial engineering and another, whispered in bone, of private faith. A ditch filled with ritual skulls speaks of spiritual anxiety, but an empty room tells a tale of pure, practical necessity. At the fort of Isica on Hadrian's wall, archaeologists uncovered a long, rectangular chamber with a massively reinforced floor, its location and construction perfectly matching the blueprint for an armamentaria, a legionary armory. This was the fort's beating heart of steel, where racks of javelins, stacks of swords, and rows of shields would have been stored under heavy guard. Yet when the excavation team brushed away the centuries of soil, they found the room almost hauntingly bare. A few broken spear tips, a single discarded shield boss, some rusted nails from a wooden rack, but no stockpiles, no hidden caches, no orderly rows of weapons waiting for the next call to arms. The armory had been cleaned out with a startling degree of thoroughness. This emptiness is a louder statement than any pile of treasure. It forces us to ask a stark question about the fort's final days. Where did all the swords go? The first and most logical answer is that the departing garrison took them. In a planned, orderly withdrawal, a Roman commander's first priority would be to secure his unit's equipment. Weapons were not just tools, they were expensive state property, and a centurion would be held accountable for their loss. The soldiers would have fallen in for the last time, collected their gladii from the racks, slung their pila over their shoulders, and marched out with every functional piece of steel they owned. The empty armory at Isica could simply be the result of good discipline, a unit leaving as a complete armed force for redeployment elsewhere. But this neat explanation frays when we compare it to other sites. At the signal station of Huntcliffe, we saw evidence of a sudden, violent end. If Isica's garrison left under orders, why did others apparently not? This leads to a darker possibility: systematic looting. Once the word spread that the legions were pulling back for good, the frontier would have descended into a free-for-all. Local tribes, rival warlords, or even desperate farmers might have swarmed the abandoned fort. Their first target would not be the granaries or the barracks, but the armory. To them, a Roman sword was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of supreme power and a piece of technology far superior to their own. They would have stripped the room clean, leaving only the broken and worthless pieces behind. The emptiness in this scenario is a signature of chaos and opportunism, a vacuum filled not by Roman order, but by the scavengers who inherited a broken border. Yet there is a third, more intriguing option that lies between disciplined withdrawal and chaotic looting: official redistribution. In the final decades of Roman Britain, the central authority was crumbling, but local commanders might have tried to manage the collapse. Could a regional dux, a military duke, have issued orders not just to evacuate but to consolidate? Perhaps the weapons from Ithaca were carefully catalogued, crated up, and shipped south to bolster the defenses of a larger, more defensible stronghold like York or Chester. The army, in its death throes, was cannibalizing its own extremities to strengthen its core. The empty armory would then be a testament not to panic, but to a grim, last-ditch logistical plan. Each scenario paints a different picture of the end. If the garrison took the weapons, they left as soldiers. If looters took them, they left as victims. If the army redistributed them, they left as pieces on a strategic board being hastily reset. The few broken items left behind are the key. They were not worth the time of a looter in a hurry, nor would they have been taken by a soldier who needed a reliable blade. They are the discards, the final, useless fragments of Roman military might in that place. To stand in that excavated room is to feel the weight of that absence. You can almost see the ghostly outlines of the racks on the floor, the spaces where the shields leaned against the wall. The silence here is not spiritual, it is logistical. It asks us to decide whether the last man to close that heavy door was a Roman centurion following orders, a triumphant chieftain clutching a pile of plundered swords, or a weary quartermaster marking one last item off a ledger. The empty armory does not tell us who won or lost. It only tells us that when the end came, someone made sure that the weapons did not stay behind. Deep in the clogged drain of a Roman latrine at Caergae in Wales, archaeologists recovered a stone that did not belong. It was not a piece of fallen masonry or a lost coin. Its surface was carved with a series of straight lines and notches, a script that looked nothing like the elegant Latin of the legions. This was Ogham, an alphabet used for inscriptions in early Irish, a language of the world beyond the Western Sea. How did a voice from Ireland come to be silenced in the foul darkness beneath a Roman fort? The stone itself is small, meant to be held, its message personal. The script typically spells out names, usually in the form of X son of Y. It is a declaration of identity, a marker of a person. Yet here it lay, discarded with the waste. The journey of this stone from an Irish hand to a Roman sewer is a trail of whispers across a frontier of water. One strong possibility points to the complex manpower of the late Roman army. By the 4th century, the empire often filled its ranks with barbarian recruits, whole tribes enlisted as federates or liti. Could the stone's carver have been an Irish warrior, a mercenary serving on the wall for pay or land? Far from home, he might have carved his name and lineage into this small rock as a touchstone, a piece of his identity in a world of foreign tongues and discipline. When he lost it, or perhaps when he died, the curious stone, meaningless to his Latin-speaking comrades, was simply swept away with the rest of the refuse. But a mercenary is not the only traveler. The Irish Sea was a highway, not a barrier. Traders moved along the coast, dealing in slaves, hides, and fine metalwork. An Irish trader residing in the civilian settlement outside the fort, a vicus, might have carried this inscribed stone as a personal seal or a good luck charm. Its deposition in the fort's latrine suggests he had business inside the walls, perhaps meeting with the quartermaster to negotiate a contract for supplies. The stone could have slipped from his pouch in the dim, crowded space, falling into the channel to be lost. There is a darker path, however. The stone might not have arrived with a willing immigrant but as plunder. Roman patrols or naval scouts could have intercepted an Irish raiding party along the coast. Among the captured goods would be personal items like this inscribed stone, taken from a slain or enslaved warrior. Brought back to the fort as a minor trophy, it would have been a curiosity for a while before being tossed aside, its significance utterly lost on the soldier who eventually cleared it from his quarters. Each theory paints a different picture of the frontier. Was it a place of integration where an Irishman could find a new life in a Roman uniform? Was it a hub of commerce where different worlds met in the marketplace? Or was it a zone of perpetual, low-level conflict where personal treasures changed hands at the point of a sword? The Ogham stone does not say. It only states in its silent, angular language that someone from Ireland was here at this Roman fort and that a piece of them ended up in the dark. The drain preserved the stone, but not the story of the hand that held it. We are left with a name we cannot fully read, belonging to a man whose fate we cannot know. A single, stark line connecting two worlds that history often tells us were separate. The Ogham stone whispers of outsiders drawn to the fort, but another structure speaks of a commander who chose to step outside. In the dense forests of Germania, along the river frontiers, archaeologists have mapped forts with a puzzling anomaly. The Praetorium, the commander's official residence, is not safely nestled within the fortified walls. Instead, it sits apart, a detached villa sometimes hundreds of feet from the gate, connected only by an exposed path. This arrangement shatters the basic logic of frontier defense. Why would the man in charge, the very symbol of Roman authority, voluntarily place himself and his family in such a vulnerable position? The answer is not found in military manuals, but in the complex, often contradictory roles a commander had to play. On one level, this was a powerful statement of confidence. Building a lavish home outside the walls was a declaration that the Roman peace was absolute. It said to the local tribes, "We are so secure in our control that our leader does not even need these ramparts." He lives openly in the manner of a Roman gentleman on his country estate, not a besieged warlord in his citadel. This was the ultimate performance of Romanitas, of Romanness. The villa itself was the script. Imagine its features: underfloor heating from a hypocaust system, walls painted with colorful frescoes of gardens and myths, a private bath suite with hot and cold rooms. It was a bubble of Mediterranean civilization transplanted into the Germanic wilderness. This luxurious lifestyle, so starkly different from the cramped barracks, reinforced the social chasm between the commander, often a senatorial aristocrat, and the common soldiers he led. He was not just their officer, he was a representative of the empire's supreme culture, and his home was a permanent exhibit of its benefits. Yet the villa's location also served a more pragmatic, diplomatic function. The fort's interior was a world of strict military hierarchy, Latin commands, and legionary standards. It was not a comfortable place for a local chieftain to be entertained. The detached villa, however, could function as neutral ground. Here, the commander could host tribal leaders in a setting that communicated both power and hospitality. He could offer wine from Italian vineyards, serve food on fine Samian-ware pottery, and conduct negotiations in a triclinium, a dining room designed for leisurely conversation. This was soft power in action. By building a bridge literally and figuratively to the local elite, the commander could secure alliances, gather intelligence, and foster the economic ties of the vicus that grew around such a villa. His home was an embassy as much as a residence. The choice, however, carried immense personal risk. That exposed path back to the fort would have been a glaring weakness in the event of a surprise uprising or a betrayal during one of those very dinners. The commander was betting his life and the lives of his family on the stability his presence was meant to create. It was a high-stakes gamble that the projection of normalcy would make violence less likely. This architectural paradox captures the essence of frontier governance. The commander had to be both the lion, inspiring fear and respect through military might, and the fox, cultivating loyalty and cooperation through diplomacy and display. His villa outside the walls was the stage for this delicate performance. We can walk its excavated foundations today and feel the tension in its empty rooms, the ghost of opulence shadowed by the ever-present knowledge of the dark forest just beyond the garden wall. It was a calculated risk, a home built on the fragile belief that the frontier could be more than just a line to be held, but a place to truly live. A coin can be a tiny, metallic lie. Among the rarest of Roman frontier issues are those struck by the breakaway Gallic Empire in the late 3rd century, or by the usurper Carausius who seized control of Britain. One such piece, held now in a museum tray, bears a crisp, hopeful legend. It names a fort, a place along the northern frontier, and proclaims a victory or a restoration. The problem is stark and immediate. Every other piece of evidence, the silent layers of archaeology, the absence of later pottery, the end of dated inscriptions, says that this particular fort was abandoned, its walls empty, years before this coin ever left the die. The mint master carved the name of a ghost, so why produce a currency that celebrated a place you no longer held? One compelling answer is pure, desperate propaganda. In an age of crisis, confidence is currency. A usurper like Carausius, ruling a splinter state and facing threats from both the native tribes and the central Roman Empire, needed to project an image of unshakable control. To admit that the frontier had shrunk, that territory had been lost, would be to show fatal weakness. A coin bearing the name of a lost fort was a brazen fiction, meant for circulation in the safer southern cities and among the troops. It told a story of stability and continued dominion, a narrative pressed into gold and silver to buy loyalty and time. It was financial theater, a performance of power paid for with precious metal. But could there be a kernel of truth in the lie? Perhaps the coin commemorates not a present reality, but a fervent hope, a plan. Military campaigns were often announced and funded through special coin issues. This piece might represent a commander's solemn vow or an emperor's promise to his troops. We will retake that fort, we will restore that line. The coin was a tangible pledge, distributed to soldiers as a down payment on future glory. It was a map of ambition stamped in metal. The tragic mystery is whether the army ever marched. The campaign may have been planned, the dies cut, and the coins struck, only for the strategy to collapse from a lack of men, a rebellion elsewhere, or the death of the usurper himself. The coin then becomes a fossilized intention, a future that never arrived. The most tantalizing possibility, however, challenges the archaeological record itself. We base our timelines on what has been found, but absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. What if a small, stubborn garrison did hold out? A detachment of legionaries, cut off and unreported, might have maintained a tenuous grip on a fort's central tower for years after the official withdrawal, flying a tattered standard and trading with local farmers for supplies. Their existence would be invisible to history, too small to leave a new layer of occupation, their final fate unknown. But their story, whispered up the chaotic chain of command, might have reached the ears of a distant emperor, inspiring a coin that celebrated their lonely, unofficial vigil. The coin and the empty fort stand in direct contradiction. One is a voice shouting a claim, the other a silent, excavated truth. This numismatic puzzle forces us to decide what we trust more: the official story a state told about itself, or the quiet dirt from which no more Roman artifacts emerge. In the end, the coin is a question pressed into a circle of metal. Was it a deception, a dream, or a clue to a forgotten pocket of resistance? The frontier it names offers no answer, only the wind through broken gateways. The clean lines of a coin's lie give way to the disordered truth of a mass grave. Near the fort of Vindolanda, archaeologists uncovered a pit that held no treasure, only bones. Dozens of young men, their skeletons tangled together, had been placed in the earth in a single, grim event. Forensic analysis revealed the brutal story written on their bones: the cleaved skulls from sword blows, the fractured ribs from blunt force, the arrowhead still lodged in vertebrae. This was not a cemetery, but a dump site for the dead from a violent catastrophe. Yet the mystery deepens with what was missing. There were no spearheads placed in their hands for the afterlife, no coins for Charon's ferry, none of the standard military kit a Roman soldier was almost always buried with. These men died in combat but were stripped of the very identity that defined them in life. So who were they, and why were they denied the rights their service should have guaranteed? One harrowing possibility is that they were auxiliary soldiers, the non-citizen fighters who formed the backbone of the frontier army. If their unit was annihilated in a disastrous, unreported battle far from the fort, a recovery detail might have gathered the mangled bodies of their comrades. But in the frantic retreat, or perhaps in a moment of callous disregard, they simply dumped the corpses into a pit, too overwhelmed or too pressed by the enemy to conduct proper cremations or individual burials. The missing goods could be explained by looting, either by the victorious enemy who stripped the bodies on the battlefield, or by the Roman recovery team itself, salvaging valuable armor and weapons from the dead to reissue to the living. These men would have died for Rome only to be processed as broken equipment. The forensic toolkit, however, adds confounding layers. Isotope analysis of their teeth and bones can trace a person's diet and geographical origin from childhood. What if these tests revealed that many of these young men grew up eating millet and pork, a diet common in Germania, not the wheat and olive oil of the Mediterranean? This could point to a different, even darker story. They might have been captured enemy warriors, perhaps from a rival tribe, executed in a mass punishment after a failed uprising. Thrown into a pit without goods because they were not Roman, and in death they were granted no honor. Yet another, more chilling theory must be considered. The injuries are consistent with battle, but could a virulent, fast-acting plague have swept through the fort, causing such panic that the living blamed an enemy curse or poison? In their terror, might they have turned on a group they suspected, merchants or recent recruits from a specific region, slaughtering them in a hysterical purge before dumping the bodies? The uniform trauma could mask a massacre born of fear, not war. The pit is a frozen moment. It tells us that one day on this frontier, something terrible happened. A battle was lost, an order was given, a panic erupted. Dozens of lives ended violently and were disposed of with a haste that feels like shame. We can reconstruct the blows that killed them. We can guess where they were born, but we cannot hear their names or know their allegiance. They exist now only as a collective question mark written in bone, a silent testament to the fact that on the edge of empire, the line between soldier and victim, between comrade and enemy, could be erased as swiftly as a grave was dug. A single, lonely tower stands on a windswept headland, its stonework crumbling against an endless sky. This is the final mystery, not of grand strategy, but of a solitary vigil. Across the failing frontiers, from the coasts of Britannia to the deserts of Africa, a strange pattern emerges in the archaeological record. The great forts, with their barracks and headquarters, fall silent first. Their garrisons march away, their gates are sealed. Yet high on distant ridges, the simple signal towers often remain occupied. A skeleton crew, perhaps just 2 or 3 men, continues to light a beacon no army is left to answer. Why, what were these last soldiers watching for as the world they knew dissolved behind them? One practical explanation is that they served as the rearguard eyes for a retreating population. The collapse of Roman authority was not a single event, but a slow, painful unraveling. As civilians, merchants, and retired soldiers withdrew from the vulnerable lowlands toward more defensible towns, those lonely towers provided a precious early warning. A flame lit on the coast could signal not to a legion, but to a scattered community, giving them time to gather their belongings and flee inland from approaching pirates or raiders. The sentry's duty shifted from defending an empire to protecting its fleeing people. Another possibility is even more poignant. The tower's flame was a symbol, a performance of continuity in the face of chaos. So long as a light burned from the old watchtower, the idea of Rome still lived on that horizon. It was a message to the local tribes, a lingering deterrent that said, "We are still here, we are still watching." It was a fiction, of course, but a necessary one, meant to maintain a fragile peace for just a little longer, to allow some semblance of order to persist in the empire's absence. The sentries became actors in a play for an audience that may have already left the theater. Yet the most haunting interpretation is the simplest: they were following orders. A last dispatch from a distant, crumbling command might have instructed the tower guard to maintain watch until relieved, and so they did. They would have climbed the narrow ladder each dusk, scanning the empty sea or the quiet hills, lighting their beacon at the appointed hour. They would have lived on dwindling supplies, listening to the wind, wondering when the replacement cohort would arrive or when new orders would come. But the orders never came. The empire's administrative heart had stopped beating, but the nerve impulse, that final command, was still traveling out to the farthest extremities. Those men were waiting for a message from a capital that had already forgotten they existed. This final mystery is ultimately about the human experience of an ending. Put yourself in that tower as the last sentry. You look out at the unchanged landscape, the same sea, the same stars your predecessor watched a century before. But when you turn and look south toward the heartland, you see only darkness where once the glow of 1,000 villas and towns dotted the night. The silence is profound. Your world has shrunk to the circle of flickering light around your beacon. Do you feel pride in your duty or a creeping dread? Do you believe you are guarding something or merely witnessing its end? The tower itself becomes a metaphor for the entire frontier experience, a place of isolation, of focused attention on a distant threat, while the true collapse happens quietly behind you. When the last sentry finally descended that ladder for the final time, did he douse the flame with care, or did he simply walk away, leaving it to burn itself out? The stones do not say, they only stand silhouetted against the twilight, a monument to the moment when history turned its back, and a single pair of eyes kept watching long after there was anything left to see. 25 whispers from the edge of the world, from the silent, ritual burial of a god to the frantic scratchings of a curse, from the grand lie of a coin to the lonely vigil in a tower, each fragment we have uncovered is a piece of a far greater mosaic. The Roman frontier was never just a wall on a map. It was a living membrane, a zone of constant negotiation where identities blurred, faiths mingled, and orders from a distant capital met the stubborn reality of wind, sand, and human need. These mysteries, both epic and intimate, reveal a truth more compelling than any simple tale of conquest. They show us a world where a centurion could secretly honor a local spirit, where a child's toy could lie forgotten in a barracks, and where the last light of an empire was held by a single, forgotten sentry. Each unanswered question, from the fate of the 9th Legion to the meaning of the cattle skulls in the ditch, is not a gap in history but an invitation. It asks us to look closer, to listen for the echoes in the silence, and to understand that the past is not a settled fact, but a conversation we are still having. So we leave you with one final reflection, a question to carry with you from this journey along the limes. Of all the enigmas we have explored, which one haunts you the most? Is it the sudden silence of a fort's paperwork, the chilling emptiness of a poisoned well, or the quiet courage of a soldier carving his homeland's script onto a stone far from home? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let the conversation continue. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of history, subscribe for more journeys to the places where the record ends and the real detective work begins. Remember, history is not merely the story written in stone. It is also the profound and thrilling mystery of what that stone refused